Hi, folks. Welcome to our panel discussion of PhDs who landed roles in industry without internships. My name is Tori Wauber, and I'll be your host for this panel. I'm a career and leadership coach, and I'm passionate about helping PhDs find opportunities outside of academia. My hope for today's panel is that PhDs who have made this type of leap will share their experience, and that will provide information and inspiration for attendees, and that we come away from today's panel with a heightened sense of opportunity for leveraging doctoral training outside of academia. So panelists can get to know you attendees. Please drop into the chat where you are in your PhD program, what year you're in, whether you're post-PhD. Give us a sense of where you are relative to your PhD so we can get to know you a bit. Second year, third year, some postdocs. Nice. Okay, good variety. You can see here, panel, that we've got folks all the way from first year PhD through to postdoc ABD stage. Nice, recent completion. Awesome. Well, and so hopefully today we're going to dive into these tactics around getting a role without an internship, and that'll be useful to folks whether you're in your first year or whether you're a postdoc or somewhere in between. So we're going to start off by introducing our panel, and then I'll ask a few pre-prepared questions. Attendees, feel free to drop questions in the chat throughout. I'll do my best to jump in and source those and read them to panelists, but heads up that given the number of attendees, we may not be able to get to everyone's question. First thing I want to, or the last thing I want to say before we introduce our panel, heads up that they're speaking on behalf of themselves, not their organizations. So panelists are speaking on behalf of panelists. All right, let's dive in with introductions. So my name is Tori Wauber. I'm a career and leadership coach. I did my PhD in human evolutionary biology at Harvard and finished that up in 2012. I then worked for 7 years in the tech industry at Facebook and Google before starting my own business in 2020. I've now helped more than 70 PhDs find roles outside of academia, and I love doing this work because it helps folks see the doors that they have open to them, and that empowers and energizes me. All right, let me introduce our panelists. Elena Reister completed her PhD in chemistry at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She's currently a senior research analyst at Pearson. Hi, Elena.
Hi, everyone.
Just so our attendees can get to know you, how many years post-PhD are you?
I'm 3. I graduated in December of 2019.
Nice. And you're a research analyst. How much of your time percentage is towards heads down analysis versus heads up meeting?
Yeah, so I'm really lucky in that I get to spend about 80% of my time actually doing analysis and only about 20% going to meetings. We actually have liaisons on our team that do a lot of the meetings for us and just bring us the information we need.
Nice. And then critical question, socks with sandals, yay or nay?
I'm going to go nay because I don't even really like sandals.
So not even socks with sandals, no sandals whatsoever. Nice, reasonable. All right, thank you, Elena. Good to have you here. We have Eric James Stevens, who completed his PhD in rhetoric at Clemson University. He's currently a consultant at the Persimmon Group. Welcome, Eric.
Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yay. Eric, how many years post-PhD are you?
I graduated in the spring of 2018, so that's about 4 years.
And roughly how many colleagues or clients do you interact with on a weekly basis?
I talk to a lot of people. I would probably average anywhere between 3 to 7 different clients and or colleagues a week.
Nice. Potentially more social there than academics. We'll get into in a moment. And critical question, emojis in work email, yay or nay?
Yay. I use them selectively, but I use them.
Nice. Selective emoji fan. Nice. All right. Welcome, Eric. Ethan Levine. Hi, Ethan. Ethan completed his PhD in sociology at Temple University. He's currently a research and data analyst with the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking. Welcome, Ethan.
Hey.
All right, quick question so folks can get to know you. How many years post-PhD are you?
Same as Eric, spring 2018.
Nice. Roughly how many projects are you juggling at this moment?
That's a little hard to quantify, depending on how you do your math, like 3 to 6, but in a manageable way.
A manageable 3 to 6 projects.
Yeah.
I like it. And then critical question, pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
It's not for me, but I feel like I'm missing out on something really important.
There must be something to this pineapple.
Right. There's something to it.
Who knows? All right, welcome, Ethan.
Thank you.
And Kira Reen completed her PhD in psychiatric epidemiology at Johns Hopkins University. She's currently a clinical research lead at Eleanor Health. Welcome, Kira.
Hi, thanks for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Kira, how many years post-PhD are you?
I finished my PhD in July 2021, so about a year and a half.
Nice. Okay, we've got a good spread then from recently to a couple years ago. And roughly, how long does a typical project at your work take you? What's the typical timeline?
That's a tough question to answer. Similar to what Ethan said. I'd say it's super variable. Sometimes something can be like, we need this done tomorrow. And I'm like, well, okay, I'll do my best. And then other things kind of stretch out a little bit longer. And I can have more autonomy in like how rigorous we execute a certain project. Yeah, so it's kind of all over the place.
Well, and you're calling out two differences from academic work there, the got to be done tomorrow and the level of rigor adjustments. So we can dive into those in a moment. Oh, and then, oh, wait, your fun question. Do aliens exist, yay or nay?
I'm going to say yay. I've never seen one, but I have like a feeling that they're out there. That's just, my gut is telling me.
There we go. Never seen, gut feeling. Got it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, welcome, Kira. Awesome to have this panel pulled together. I think we'll dive straight in with pre-prepared questions. And again, feel free to drop in the chat. And I see that someone's asking about accessible subtitles, and I will look into that in a moment once our panelists start sharing their stories. So panelists, I imagine folks are curious to hear about your journey out of academia. And so can you share the factors that fueled you moving out and sort of what energized you to move to where you are now? Anyone want to jump in first?
I'll go. We're all way too polite. Look at this. So yeah, so on one hand, on one level, I was always looking, like what really motivated me to get a PhD in the first place was feeling like when I was like just an advocate in the anti-violence field, that my coworkers and I were dismissed, talked over by decision makers. And I had this fantasy that we could just trot out a Dr. So-and-so to like say the thing to the legislator. And eventually I decided to become Dr. So-and-so. But these jobs are kind of hard to find. I was on the tenure track for about 3 years. A little after graduating, I got a position in a criminal justice and victimology program and really missed the connection to advocacy. So I just started kind of rebuilding those connections out and started a running search for anything that seemed to incorporate research skills, but was housed in the anti-violence fields. That was where it started for me.
I can go next. I only finished my PhD like a year and a half ago. I wasn't really thinking about leaving academia before then. I was kind of like the person within my cohort who was like gonna go into academia, like no questions, like that was kind of like a set done deal. Honestly, during my postdoc, I started realizing that I was just like the lack of structure was really difficult for me. And the thought of submitting another grant was just like, it wasn't exciting anymore. There was kind of like a pit in my stomach when I thought about that. And I started getting unexcited about my research. And that was really upsetting to me as someone who's always loved research. I just wasn't excited about it anymore. And I knew I needed to make a change. So that's kind of what pushed me to look outside of academia. And I was just so excited by all the different types of positions that were out there. I think also I just like, frankly, from like a personal perspective, I just was like, how many more years am I going to do this? How many more years am I going to have no retirement savings? Like putting off visiting my parents back in Canada because I can't afford it. Like it was like, how much longer am I going to do this? I want my life to start. And so that was another thing that really pushed me to see outside of academia.
And so it's interesting, I'm hearing in there changing interests, right? Which is sometimes not so easy to navigate when you're staying within academics, and changing priorities, right? Recognizing that at different points of your life, different things matter. And there are opportunities to address those with careers outside of academics. Those resonate with folks. Anything else to build on there?
I can share my story. About I was politely asked to leave academia because of budget constraints and COVID pandemic, and I was applying to jobs that were just disappearing. When I left academia, I was kind of like given the boot. And the way that I navigated into my position was really I couldn't walk into a room and say, I have a PhD, you should hire me. I had to build something and create something. And so I did. I created a hashtag social media campaign called Hire Ed. And that's how I met a lot of people. And I manically created things to show people what I was capable of doing. And that's how I got down on a phone call with the CEO of an ed tech company, gave me all the reasons why he wouldn't hire someone like me. I gave him all the reasons why he should. And 3 days later, he's calling me and asking me if I know how to do data. And I didn't. And he said, you can learn that. And he gave me a job. And that's how I did that. I've since left there and doing other things now. But it's like it's so interesting being on a panel with people who made the decision to leave, where I didn't get that privilege. And so I'm excited to be here to kind of share this space. Thank you.
I guess I will follow up after that amazing story. So I went into a postdoc, like many of us apparently, after my PhD, and honestly, like it wasn't the best experience. And from that, my postdoc advisor decided like 3 months after I moved halfway across the country that she was going to a different school and I couldn't like keep my position anymore. And I kind of got to the point where I was a little tired of getting screwed over by academia and how I wanted my life to go. I wanted freedom that academia couldn't give me. I wanted to live where I wanted to live. I wanted to work from home. I wanted to do things kind of on my own schedule. And I love how that's like touted as like being a thing that academia gives you, but like it's not. So I then started to make the transition in first building my own brand, so that because the thing I really wanted to do in academia was like help students in research. And then I realized, well, I can do that anyways. There's YouTube. So that's what I did instead. And then I, in my like actual career, switched to actually looking for industry positions instead.
And so I'm hearing the freedom that's available, right? That sort of, hey, once I'm outside of academics, there's all sorts of other stuff possible. But one thing that's coming up there, and there's a question about this in the chat, is about knowing how to take your doctoral training and leverage that somewhere else. And so maybe if folks can speak to you, how did you recognize where your transferable skills were and how to speak about them in a new setting?
I can speak to that a little bit. Another campaign that I started to show people what I could do was called Translate Academia. And because like there's that concept of like, what is a transferable skill? I think everybody here needs to understand and hear this. You have experience. You don't need an internship. You're in your internship right now. Okay. You don't need to learn new skills. You just need to learn how to talk about your existing skills differently. The easiest way to do that is by talking to people who do that stuff through informational interviews, And my favorite thing is to go to LinkedIn Learning and play. Don't go to try to learn something. Consider it language acquisition. Like you do A/B testing. You just don't know that that's what you're doing. Like you do all of that. You know what UX, you know everything that you just don't know that language yet. And so one of the like, if your concern is how do I get experience, you're asking the wrong question. You should be asking, how do I talk about my existing experience differently using the language of my audience, which is industry.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback on that. That was like my exact experience, honestly, was like and we can dive into like how exactly we landed our roles without internships later. I think we'll be doing that. But yeah, I couldn't agree more with like translating your academic experience. Like that was essential for me. I spent like 3 months applying to jobs that I thought that I knew I was a great fit for, and just getting rejected across the board because I didn't know how to write a good resume. Like it was just these like subtle differences between academia and industry. Like we don't say multidisciplinary, we say cross-functional. You don't say like results, you say insights. It's just these key differences. But like once you can make that transition and like start to communicate a bit better, like that's when I started actually getting bites on my resume and like actually getting interviews.
And can I just add one little thing real quick? I also think we get really stuck in, okay, if I'm doing this in my research, then I need to find a job that's doing that. So like if I'm studying X protein, I need to find a job. You have to realize I got my PhD in chemistry and now I do data science for education. Like I do not, and that was a big reason for me moving into industry is I hated the lab. I hate the lab. I never want to go into a lab again. And so like as a chemist, other people don't understand why I would have a PhD when I don't like doing lab work. It doesn't make sense to them. And that was the biggest thing. Like when we're talking about language, I straight up had an interviewer say to me that like, the only reason I'm even interviewing you right now is because somebody like referred you to this position. I don't think you would be good for this role. And then he asked another question and I answered him in his own language. And all of a sudden I was offered the position the next day. So like, you have to understand that you have the experience, you have the knowledge to get the roles. It's just about being able to speak it and translate it. Like what you did, translate it into, I've already done the job I'm applying for. It just had a different name at the time.
Add one piece of that too. So I'm in a field that does not have a lot of research related jobs, that does not have a lot of folks with a research background, so like CAST, where I'm working at now, knew they wanted research to be part of what they did, but they didn't even really have language to put to that just yet, so still like same kind of challenge that, Eric and Kira were talking about. But in my case, I spoke about things like, hey, you probably see issues come up in your service provision all the time, and you don't have best practices to turn to. You probably have a lot of data in your system that just sits there, but I can work with you to use that data to evaluate your programming. We can generate some of the research that you wish you could cite because I know how to take a problem you've observed in service and turn it into an answerable research question, and so kind of finding ways to really demonstrate what those skills could bring to the organization and kind of demystifying research a little.
I think I want to, because this is so interesting to me. I love talking about this stuff because the problem that we're facing right now and talking about this like language and like what do we use, and like we're trying to understand how people are talking about it. And Ethan is exactly right. Like, I mean, as an analyst, I did research, but it's called analytics. It's just, it's a different word. And when we kind of have more fun with that idea of language, our academic identities are grounded in nouns, right? In the thing that we studied. Your industry value is in the verbs that you did to obtain those nouns. So don't consider yourself a chemist who plays with data. Consider yourself a data analyst who has experience working in chemistry. Your subject matter expertise becomes auxiliary to your main function, your verb, that what you do. And so as you're going through and trying to figure out what that question, like, where do I go? What do I do? Ask yourself, don't say like, what's the job title I want? What do you want to do? Because probably that job title is going to vary wildly between organizations and sectors. So focus on your verbs. Like, what are you doing? What do you want to continue to do?
And so I'm hearing a build there, which actually draws on a question in the chat, which is almost like explore via verbs, right? Explore via the verbing of what you want to do instead of the nouning. But there's a question there about how to explore and find industry positions, right? Because to some extent with academics, we know what the path is. It's fairly well trodden. Outside of that, the space is a lot bigger. How did folks on the panel explore and sort amongst the available options?
So I'll go, if that's okay, I'll go first because I love this question. And I talk about it all the time whenever people are like job searching, because so many people, like, for example, my current job I found through a way on LinkedIn, just searching for jobs. So like I know people are going to talk about referrals and networking, and that's great, but that is not me. Just being honest there. So whenever you're searching for jobs, never search for a title. Don't search for senior research analyst. Search for whatever it is you want to be doing in that job. So I wanted to be doing Python and SQL. Like that's what I wanted to search. So I searched Python and SQL and looked for the jobs that were relevant to that. So figure out, and even if it's one thing, like whenever I was looking for chemistry jobs, I used to actually search mass spectrometry or LCMS. And because that was the roles that I wanted to find. So it has nothing to do, know what you want to do and then search for what you want to be doing in that job.
Yeah, I'm gonna build off of that. Just especially the point about like not getting hung up on job titles. I think that really held me back at the beginning because I was looking exclusively for positions that were like research scientist. And it's kind of ironic because I did end up in a position that has research in the title, and it's been a great fit for me. But as I'm looking, like I still keep up to date on LinkedIn. I'm always looking at like what else is out there. And like most of the things that are interesting to me now have nothing to do with research, like have nothing, even if research is like a component of the job, it's not in the job title. It's like job titles that I would never have thought I would ever have in my life. So yeah, in terms of my search strategy, I primarily like Elena used LinkedIn and was just like searching there, spent a lot of time just like scrolling. There's a lot of like interesting functions like see positions that are similar to this or like other jobs that are like this one that were particularly helpful for me. And once you start saving them, then the algorithm gets better at understanding what you're looking for. But yeah, beyond spending a lot of time on LinkedIn, my biggest piece of advice would be like, don't get hung up on the job title.
And I want to like just to echo that concept, right? You like, and this is when we're talking about LinkedIn specifically, as much as you are engaging with humans, you are engaging with an algorithm, and algorithms use words and they use keywords, right? So there are things that you can do by engaging with the algorithm, not with the nouns, but with the verbs, like we're talking about, like doing SQL, right? Or Tableau or things like that. Be creating posts, right? That use those words, right? Because those are the words that recruiters are searching for when they search for people, right? So engage with the algorithm intelligently, using like a lot of these keywords that are just, this is fantastic advice, right? Just like focus on the deliverable. What is it that at the end of the day, when you hand to your director and say, look, I'm doing my job, what is it that you're handing them, right? You can't just say research. Is it a PowerPoint? Is it a Tableau visualization? Like, what is it? The tools that you want to use are going to help you figure out how to make that decision better than any job title would.
Yeah. So one other piece that was really critical in my search, I actually did not use LinkedIn at all. I used Idealist for all of my job searching. I knew I was gunning for the nonprofit sector, and so that was really the place for me to look. But I would absolutely still echo the job title thing. I mean, God, research positions in nonprofits, nobody knows what these are. Like, they all have titles that tell you nothing about the job. And a lot of times the jobs are made up, like, and don't look like what you're going to do. My job description has no education requirement. It was very much a like, I don't know, come in and build this. You know? So I came in, Idealist, which I will put in, sorry. there in the chat. Yes. So another big thing that came up for me in my job search was thinking about the values that I wanted driving my work. That was a huge challenge for me on the tenure track. So I'm a sociologist, I'm a survivor advocate, and I wound up getting a tenure track job in a criminal justice program that was super carceral, where every other practitioner pretty much was in law enforcement, you know, people who had been whose work had been really like in opposition to mine when I was in anti-violence advocacy before. And even within, so currently I'm in the anti-trafficking field where the politics are pretty broad. People have different attitudes about policy around the sex trades, different ideas about survivor engagement. And so I really tried to scope out, I like looked at the organizations before I applied. I was in the luxurious position of applying for a job while I had one that I want to acknowledge. But in that position, I just asked direct questions, you know, like in my cover letter, I guess this is public anyway, but I am not a trafficking survivor, but I've worked in the sex trades before, and that's an issue that gets really contentious in trafficking. And I put that in my cover letter. And so like, I heard back from orgs that were like, yes, you, and I never heard back from orgs that didn't want that kind of person on staff. And so that was also a huge part of my search.
Well, and part of what you're sharing that I think is a huge like mindset shift for folks is this notion of values matching and choice, that you would seek to be part of an organization whose values you shared, that you would actually choose somewhere where the skills, the strengths, the type of people you're around. I think many academics don't feel that choice. They feel much more scarcity. And so it's really important to highlight, like, you can choose. And so I'm curious then, let's talk nuts and bolts, right? Let's actually go through the like, okay, what are the steps to land a role without an internship? Anyone want to start from the sort of, you know, okay, this is what I did first, this is how it actually closed? Go for it, Kira.
Yeah, I can start. So I remember being at the start of my job search and everyone was like, you have to network. And I was like, no, I don't want to. Like, I'm really introverted and I hate it. But honestly, that is kind of how I ended up landing my job. So like, just to get into like the really specifics of what happened, I ended up joining a Slack group called Health Tech Nerds, which is actually a really, it's a funny name, but it's actually a super active Slack group. And it's actually like, it's a monthly paid membership. I think it's $10 now. And it's like a very, very active group with like tons of professionals across health tech. They have an introductions channel where you can introduce yourself. And so I did that and I was like, hi, my name's Kira. I've researched depression screening and youth mental health for like blah, blah, blah years. I'm interested in potentially transitioning to health tech. Like, please reach out if anyone wants to ever like just get coffee and chat. I probably got about like 10 or so messages from people just being like, hey, do you want to just meet for half an hour? And I did around probably 10 of those. And then one of them ended up being, and most of them, to be clear, like just ended in like a LinkedIn connection. And it was just people just wanted to meet me and hear about my research. And I wanted to hear about their experience in health tech, which was great. And then one of the calls, at the end of the call, it was with the current head of product at my company. And he was like, so we've been thinking of hiring a researcher for a while. Is that something you might be interested in? And from there, he set up calls with like the medical director and the CEO of my company. And then I sort of met with them informally, and then I transitioned into like the actual like formal interview process. And then from there, I ended up landing the job. So that's like the nuts and bolts of how I got my position. Yeah.
So I guess I'll go, if that's okay. So I was actually in a previous contract scientist role, and I knew I'd been trying to switch over into data scientist. And when you come from chemistry, that's a little difficult to do. So I had been upping my skills, and I went on the job market twice for that. The first time I didn't get a lot of takes, and that's why I ended up taking the scientist role. And that was before I specifically knew Python. I didn't have it on my resume. And then I added Python when I was in that contract role. I learned it, I added it to my resume. And so the second time I went on the job market, I had 2 referrals, and then I was just applying on LinkedIn. So I was just looking, I was searching SQL and Python, and a role at Pearson came up that was actually not the role I'm currently in. So I applied, I got an interview, went through like 2 or 3 interviews with them, had to do like a task and everything. And then I got an email saying I didn't get the role. And the hiring manager was like, hey, can we connect on LinkedIn? Because you were still a really good candidate. Can we connect on LinkedIn? Because I'll look out for roles in the future. And I was like, okay, like I had seen those before. And like usually they just connect and they never reach back. Well, like 3 weeks later, my current boss messaged me on LinkedIn and was like, I have this position. This person recommended me. The previous hiring manager recommended me to her. Would you be interested? So I think it's like really interesting in that sometimes interviewing can actually be networking if you like take it from that perspective. And so I ended up interviewing for this role and was like actually accepted, got the job offer from that role. So I think it's a very different way than probably most people get their roles.
Okay, I feel like this is a perfect segue, right? Okay, so context, I'm currently in a contract role that's part-time and it's fun, and I'm looking for full-time with benefits and things. Since August, I have interviewed for 16 positions, totaling 30 interviews, right? And I had an interview today for one of them with the hiring manager who I'd be reporting to. And I knew going in, because I was, I'm enjoy talking to people, and your recruiters are your best friends. You treat them like gold because they're the ones that are going to remember you for the next opening they have up, right? And she convinced the hiring manager to interview me, even though they had an internal candidate as a preference, right? And so to echo also what Ethan said about this idea of like you kind of like knowing that you have something, you're a little bit more brazen about what you can say and do. So pretend like you've just got your shit figured out, all right? And be that person, right? Because in that, just today, I asked her the explicit question. I say, I know you want an internal candidate. Why would you want to hire me as an external candidate? You're interviewing me for some reason. Why? What makes me a better hire? And she had to answer it. And I knew that I wasn't going to get it because of the way that she was like using her syntax and language and saying goodbye to me, right? And so to echo what Elena said, right, is right, is use those interviews as a networking opportunity. And I said, I know you're probably going to go with your internal candidate. That's a choice I'd probably make too. What other positions do you have open for me? And she said, I'll put you on my list. Okay. Your goal, your purpose of activity on LinkedIn or job searching is not to get a job. It is to get interviews. You get as many as you can, right? Like get in a position where you can say no to people. So yeah, just I love that idea of like using network, like using that in that actual interview, not an informational interview, like at a job interview to network, because that's more likely the way you're going to get a job is not your first interview with the company. It's going to be the next one, because that's how it works. Recruiters have people who they know when a job comes up. They don't want to start from zero every single time. So you just got to get into the pipeline. There's some really good ones out there that you can work with.
Yeah, I guess I would add to that. Even as someone who had some advocacy experience, I had a pretty rough first year or so of looking. And so I did, I am not a great networker either. Super hear you on that, Kira. Part of that was redoing my resume and realizing that I had been so immersed in higher ed for so long that I didn't remember how to talk about my work outside of those environments. Extra shout out to a lot of what Eric and some other folks have done, because even though this is our first direct encounter, God, Eric, I don't know if I'd have this job without you. All the work you've done for our community. But I do think really one of the big shifts for me as well was that I just got more and more like open and direct in cover letters and in interviews, and started getting those like absolutely yes or absolutely no responses, which also really helped save me some time and heartache, because then I also wasn't doing interviews at places anymore where we wouldn't want to work together, and so just putting more and more of it out there really worked for me.
And so I'll echo two things that I'm hearing. having that reflection first up front of what do I want to do, and then as you're talking to folks and exploring stuff, what's clicking and what's not. And then that at the end of the day, some person is going to make a decision on hiring. A resume screening algorithm might get you through the first round, but really it's a person at the end of the day. And so looking for connections, looking for people where you feel there are overlaps of opportunity, where they have a business need that you can meet with your skills. That personal level, you know, even folks who are more introverted, at some level, it's going to be a person. And so being aware that you can use tactics that will actually minimize the person side, but there will be some involvement there. Is that fair, panelists? Does that resonate? Yeah. And so let's see, we've had questions coming up in the chat about references, but I'll underscore there, you don't need them until the very end stage, and they don't have to be your advisor. Finding recruiters. That's interesting. Would folks recommend going to find recruiters or something different?
Here's what I would recommend as far as the recruiter piece. And I'll say a note about a recruiter interview, right? Recruiter interviews are low key. Don't put nearly as much pressure as you think. It's much more conversational than it is anything else. Anytime, so on LinkedIn, it will tell you who the recruiter is for that job, right? So if you apply for a job, try to connect with the recruiter, okay? Don't ask them for a job in your message, right? Just let them know, say, hi, I just applied. My very favorite thing that gets me constant responses is just saying this honest thing. I would be a non-traditional candidate and you would not regret talking to me if we talked. And people respond to that really positively. So you know who's posting the job. You can send them a message. It's like, hi, I want to be on your radar. I think I'm worth a conversation if we ever have one, right? The way that you want to get introduced to a recruiter, right, is to start connecting with people who work at companies and ask them for informational chats or networking chats, informational interviews. And you just go and you ask this very, very, very simple question. How does someone like me fit into a world like yours? And you're forcing them to consider you as a character in their life. And then you just take notes about the words that they use and how they translate. After that conversation, like your goal is to be memorable. So you're enthusiastic, you're engaging, right? So at the end of the call, they remember you. And then you say, like, hey, like, do you like and you say, hey, there's a position over here that I found at your job. You're not asking them to be a referral. You're saying, can you introduce me to the recruiter? And that's what you do. Okay. You never make a hard ask. They're all very subtle asks. Oh, say, but that's a tangent. That's how you find recruiters, is you look for them.
I'm just gonna add a little thing, is I'm very opposite of Eric in that I don't message recruiters. So I've actually had a lot of recruiter interviews, and they predominantly came when I changed my LinkedIn about and everything. I started using the keywords that, because recruiters are searching keywords all the time. Recruiters are looking for you. You have to present yourself as the solution to their problem. And if you're always thinking, what would recruiters be searching for when they're looking for a candidate to fill the job I want, and then throw all those words into your bio, and I get both on the chemistry side, which I'm not looking for, but it's in my bio, but I get a lot in the in-between in bioinformatics. I get a lot of recruiters reaching out to me in bioinformatics because I have both sides. So think about it that way as well. It's always like inbound and outbound marketing, right? Like Eric's very outbound and I'm very like inbound. Come find me and I'll present myself as the solution.
I'm gonna build on what Elena was just saying, with like getting people to come to you. I think one of my biggest roadblocks, in terms of both my resume and also just the way I was like marketing myself on LinkedIn, was that I was writing things that researchers would find like informational and impactful. Like I cannot emphasize this enough. The people who are going to be looking at your profile are not academic researchers, they're recruiters. You have to use their language. You have to use the words that they're looking for. Like I have some things on my resume where I'm like, where it's like, oh, I have like this many citations and like an H index of this. And I'm like, if someone in academia read this, they'd be like, ha 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 ha, like, what is she talking about? Like, this doesn't mean anything. But like these types of numbers and quantification, like that's what's going to stick with a recruiter. And you have to remember, like the first person to see your resume, it's probably going to be a recruiter. It's not the person who is going to, who your like very niche academic experience is going to stick with. So yeah, if you find yourself, you're having a roadblock where you're like writing your resume and you're like, this just sounds ridiculous. This does not sound like something that I would write as an academic, like, then you're probably doing it right. And I would encourage you to like lean into that discomfort and like do it anyway, because it can be a huge game changer in like knowing how to sell yourself and how to market yourself properly for these kinds of roles.
Well, and I think there's a step prior to recruiters that I want to just poll the panel on to see if you use these, and that's informational interviews, right? Eric mentioned these. On the panel, how many of you did at least one informational chat as you were searching? Wow, none. And so you found, say more, Ethan.
I was going to say, yeah. So and the job that I wanted, like this specific, I want to bring research to anti-violence advocacy. There's maybe like 15 jobs like this in the United States, right? So that was not like interviewing. An informational interview at CAST would not necessarily have been helpful to me because nobody's job is like my job. I got great advice from my grad director 10 years ago when I started my PhD, where he was like, I don't know how to do what you want to do. Can you find someone with that job? So I found people with jobs like mine at organizations I'd probably never work for, and like kind of cold emailed them. It was like, would you please be my research friend? I want to do what you do, but somewhere else. I promise I'm not coming for your job. And like, built those relationships. That didn't really get me a job, but it helped me figure out how to present myself and like what to fight for when building the program out.
Nice. So getting the vocabulary through research friends, through info interviews, and then Elena, I'll bet you had a different way to get the vocabulary.
I did. So I'm sorry. I'm not the extroverted person. I'm way too scared to go talk to someone. So if you're like that, I'm there with you guys. So what I actually did, and this was a game changer in every single interview I had in getting an interview, I built a portfolio. So I was looking for data science roles, and you can do this in so many different areas. I found a public data sets in the types of things I wanted to do. So like I was interested in marketing. So I took my own Twitter stats, did an analysis, and then I said, this is what I project would be a good Twitter schedule to follow. And then I did that Twitter schedule for a month and said, I improved my organic leads by 120%. That will get a marketer really interested in, because that's the words they use. So it really helped because I built my own business. So like that helped give me the vocabulary, was learning that, but also do the job. Like if you want to go do a job, do that job as much as you like. If you're trying to do a lab job, obviously you're not going to be able to do that. But like if you're doing like, if you want to do protein work, there are a million genomics data sets available on the internet, publicly available. Analyze one and put it on GitHub completely free, and put a link in your resume, put a link in your LinkedIn bio. And that's going to give you so much experience that you can actually talk like you know what you're doing when you actually do it, even though no one paid you to do it.
I think this is just so great. I lost it. I'll come back to it. I lost it, but I'm going to come back.
Well, and so I'm hearing, do what you want to do to get the experience, talk to people close to what you're doing to what you want to do to get the experience in vocab, or just go out and start interviewing, those being things, right? Like all of those, I hope that folks in attendance are hearing the range of strategies available to you so that you can say, okay, what am I more comfortable with? What's going to fit for me, knowing that there are multiple strategies out there. And so I want to check in on this question in the chat about postdoc. How many of our panelists, show of hands, did a postdoc before landing your industry role? Okay, so 50%.
Well, academic or industry?
Either.
Okay.
Yeah. Right, so half and half, but I would say same as an internship, a postdoc is not essential, right?
I would also say, because I did my postdoc, when I went into industry, I really had to explain to people that I did not want to go into academia, because I didn't make that turn right out of my PhD, it was a lot harder. My postdoc was always a deterrent to getting hired. It never helped me because it was an academic postdoc. Industry postdoc, I don't have that experience, but if you want to go into industry, don't take an academic postdoc unless it's like safety net. Go. And the other thing I would say, when Tori was talking about the wide range of things, start wherever you're at and then add on, right? So like if you need to look for jobs, start looking at job posts, start applying to those job posts, and look at the vocabulary in those job posts. And then start working on your resume, start asking people, start small, and then add on step by step until you get there.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Kara.
Oh, no, you go ahead, Ethan.
All right, I'll go. Yeah, I guess just
Go.
Well, one other thing, for folks who are in grad school right now, I think there are ways to build connection to different fields you might want to work in without an internship or a postdoc, right? Like, you know, if you are in a research methods class or any sort of class where there's community engagement that's valued, like you could potentially partner with a community organization in a field you're curious about and kind of get direct experience supporting them through your work. Or if you're teaching, do a service learning project in a field that interests you and kind of build out those connections that way. And that won't like derail or add time to your process.
I think what I was going to say about a postdoc is that I don't think my postdoc was helpful at all in terms of the experience that it gave me. I do think it was helpful for me. And like, I hate that this is the case, but I did my postdoc at Columbia University, which is like a huge name. And so I think it gave me a leg up in terms of that, because everyone was like, oh my gosh, she went to Columbia. And I was like, yeah, it's fine. It's like, what? It's like, whatever. But everyone seemed to think that was like a big deal. So it gave me a leg up in that sense. And then again, I don't think that this is the typical postdoc experience, but my postdoc was so completely hands-off that I really could have been doing whatever with my time. And it gave me a great opportunity to just dive into industry and spend all my time applying for jobs and like figuring out what I wanted to do next. So is an academic postdoc going to make you more competitive? No. If you find the right fit, could it give you the time and space and just like some financial support while you try to figure out your next steps? Yes. That's kind of my take on that issue.
I'll add this too. Like someone asked in the chat, like at what point should you start looking? Kind of like, I mean, doing it now, because my brain is so scattered. And I apologize. I am sorry. I'm going to come back again.
No worries, Eric. There are a lot of different lines of conversation here, but all really helpful, right? Helping folks see the real process of what happens here. And so we've been talking a lot about the approaches and the ways to get there. One question that came up earlier that I want to circle back to, any particular challenges you had in navigating that move out of academics that you would want to speak to so that someone might not fall in the same hole that you fell into?
Remove the emotional labor of applying to a job. You do not need to accept an offer to apply for a job. Nobody's asking you to accept an offer when you apply. A recruiter can look through 100 profiles in an hour to make a decision about whether or not you move on to the next step. You can apply to 100 jobs in an hour. Like that's a possibility. It's going to take time to find a job. The more you apply, the more likely you are to get a job. So be intentional about where you're going. Don't just shotgun it out, but like, be intentional, but remove the emotional labor of applying. And it's saying like, would I do this? Would I do this? You give yourself the gift of yes or no. Like this is my minimum salary. If the salary is not like, you don't say like, oh, would I do that maybe for this? No, you make a decision and you stick to it. If you want a hybrid role or if you want a remote role, you stick to those and you understand that there are hundreds of jobs that meet those qualifications and you need to start applying to them, because if you're not, other people are. And so if there's one thing that I could go back and redo, it's just like, don't spend so much time debating about whether or not you should apply. You feel like you could do 60% of it and you'd be happy, apply, because at least you're going to get a conversation with somebody and you'll get a closer knowing if that's something you actually want to do.
I'd say the academic schedule actually wound up being my biggest barrier. I was on the tenure track and I had, I taught a 3-3, but there were 4-hour classes. So I taught 12 credits a semester with a major service burden and a lot of research. And I would encourage those of you who are in teaching roles or on the tenure track and are looking at that, for one, find out what your school's policies are. I attempted to leave mid-semester and I had people set up to take over my courses for me, and the dean shut it down in a informed me that resignations can get denied, which basically means immediate termination instead of letting you continue to work however long you've offered, and which was maybe a bluff, but not really a bluff I could risk, And so what wound up happening with me, I had a very generous supervisor, but I worked both jobs full-time for 6 weeks. Like the longest I could get cast to wait was the beginning of April. And so for 6 weeks, I had 12 hours of teaching, all of the grading, and this job, and it was a lot. So I would say that's something to bear in mind. I wish I had been a little bit more of like, I had brought that up in my interviews more, kind of timing concerns. And also if you are doing any kind of like, find out what your institution's policies are if you try to leave early.
Yeah, on the institution's policies, if you're trying to leave early thing, if you do an NIH postdoc, you're going to have to sign something called an NIH payback agreement. I'm not sure how many folks have heard of this. But when I was presented with this form, I was like, this cannot be real. This cannot possibly be real. But I would, yeah. So if you're like on a T32 training grant, I would encourage you to like read the fine print of the NIH payback agreement really carefully, because it essentially, unless you leave the postdoc for like a research focused position, you're basically locked into that postdoc for 2 years, or you're going to have to pay back a year's worth of your salary. On the plus side, I found that many of I got out of the payback agreement after just 1 year of a postdoc, because the position I'm in now is still research focused, and many things do meet the definition of being research focused. But just be aware that that's a thing that exists. You can find the NIH payback agreement just by Googling it. There's a copy of it online if you're curious about learning more.
I guess I would say my biggest challenge was more in like actually getting a role. And I think it was really hard as a person who has a PhD specifically in chemistry to be taken seriously so even though I had a portfolio, people said in my interviews, I know you can do this, but I don't know if you'll stick around. Like, this might just be a thing. This might be your safety job. And as soon as you get the real job you want. And so one thing that I did is, because I had a contract scientist position, I actually leveraged that in my interviews. And I said, they were like, this could just be your safety job. And I was like, no, I'm literally in my safety job now, which is why I only go for contract positions right now, because I'm trying to get into data analytics. I'm trying to get into data science. And so that was being able to change the conversation in, yes, I understand what you're saying, and that's what I'm doing, and I'm trying to do what I want to do. And I was like, I'm not going to be a person who leaves after a year, which is why I'm taking contract roles. And that, I think, changed. And like, I was kind of lucky because I did have a contract. Would I have taken a non-contract position had I needed to? Maybe, but I was trying to put in the effort and trying to get into what I want. So I think knowing their language, like we've been talking about, but also everywhere framing yourself as the person who wants that type of job. So your LinkedIn isn't, oh, I want a postdoc, and then somewhere else is, oh, I want something else, because they're looking at all of it. So if there's discongruency between those things, you're not going to be the prime candidate.
There's a lot of questions in the chat about kind of presenting things about like your names and like the number of publications and the years of teaching, and like where you're doing the work that you're doing. I think it's important to understand that that the reason that you're probably asking a lot of these questions is because that's how the academic value system has trained us to ask those questions and value those things. Like Harvard matters, right? No, it doesn't, right? The core behind all of those questions is also what's mentioned here by Daria is imposter syndrome, is that what you have done is not yet enough. You need to own the fact that you could leave wherever you are today and be immediately successful in a job that pays you 6 figures. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be getting a PhD in the first place, right? It's a matter of building up your self-confidence and knowing that you can do this because you've already done it. You don't need to worry about the numbers of publications you have because they don't care about the number of publications you have. They care about the work that you did to do those publications and how you talk about it. And if you can talk about it in a way that makes sense to them, because if you can't, maybe you're not as great of a communicator as you claim to be, right? And to, like all a credential is, all a boot camp, a degree, all that is you relying on someone else vouching for your ability. The best thing that you can do is to create, is to make something. And all you've done as a researcher all these years is create content. Just change your audience so it's not academic, and don't make it a research paper, make a video, do something different, right? You have so much in your arsenal that you can tap immediately if you just talk about it differently and just be proud of the shit that you've done already. You don't need to do new things. Talk about what you've done differently and know that you didn't, or that you did it. Columbia University didn't do it for you. You did it. Own that. Just own it.
Can I say one practical thing, piggybacking off Eric's real quick?
Yes,
I know we're
and
getting
then
low
we're
on
getting
time.
close to time, so but
Yeah.
go ahead, Elena.
One thing that I would recommend is in the showing that you did it. For me, I always had my grad school experience in 2 different places on my resume. I had it in my education, and I always had it as work experience as a research assistant. And so I always had it like I was actually doing work for 3.5 years on this, and I always changed it to match the job, to say I was using coding to generate insights and data. That's what I would do in my bullet points. And so you don't only leave it as education, don't only leave it as a PhD, because that is, if you have a PhD, you have work experience. It just, we don't think of it as like that in academia. So put it like that on your resume.
All right, so I'm feeling inspired and called to action by our panelists. I hope that attendees are as well. I'm going to have to wrap us here since we're close to time, but let's just take a moment to thank our panelists, whether in chat or via little claps, things like that. Thank our panelists for sharing their time, expertise, their vulnerability, their honesty, their inspiration. I know I feel energized from the conversation today and inspired, and hopefully panelists, you can see the folks thanking you and putting the little claps and the hearts and all those things. And attendees, thank you for taking time, right? You just spent an hour figuring out what else you could do besides academics. That's awesome. You are investing the time in growing yourself in your career. And so well done having taken the time to explore those opportunities. I know there are a lot of questions we haven't gotten to, so this is a moment to forge future connections. If folks want to drop any links in the chat to connect further, this is a good point to do so, whether you want to connect over LinkedIn, wherever it is. Let's put those here. I will put that I offer strategy chats if anyone's hearing this today and feeling lost and feeling like they could use some guidance to help navigate it. I hope not. I hope you're feeling inspired, but I do strategy chats, so I'll drop those in. The other thing I'm going to drop, I try to make these panels better every month. And so if you have any feedback to share, I'm going to share a link here. Tell me what you enjoyed, what didn't work so well, so I can keep making panels more and more informative and helpful every month. All right, well, thank you again to panelists and attendees. Panelists, thank you so much for making time. I hope everyone got a sense of opportunity from today's conversation and that each of you finds success in growing your career the way that you choose to. Thanks so much for taking the time to join today's conversation, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, folks.